Okay, the book of Job, parts 1 and 2. So I'm going to start, of course, with your amazing questions and comments, and then we'll get into the text. So, all right, I'm going to start. So Anderson, a little more questions would help. That way I can actually talk about what you what you wrote. Right, Anderson, where are you, Anderson? I can't see you. Ah, there you are. Yes, please beef it up a little bit, right? Okay, Janakopoulos. Yes, Janakopoulos is asking interesting question. He's seeing Job shifting, right? Job is changing. He is seeing that there is a maturation process. The Job at the end is not the same as the Job in the beginning. We're going to talk about that. And his question, which is a good question, is what caused the change? And we're going to talk precisely about that. What caused the change? Something happened, right? Which really brought Job from A to B. And that's precisely what we'll be talking about. All of you are pretty angry at Job's wife. It's because you don't have a wife, so you don't know what it's like. You're in shock. That's what it's like, guys. Some wives. So yeah, Anderson is like, so yes, this wife, yeah, curse God and die, get over it. Like, get this over with. You know, just finish yourself off, you know, let's just get this over with. So yes, and one of you mentioned, I think this was Kirchnis, that was actually pretty interesting. Who was it? No, it wasn't. Who was it? Somebody mentioned that this wife, not found at the end of the story. I forget who it was, but it was, I thought that was interesting, mentioning that, well, for a text in the mother's house, right? This, the wife being so kind of marginalized, and you know, she only appears like as the villain, and then she kind of dwindles out of the story. So yes, there is definitely some issue going on here, and it doesn't sound very mother's housey, right? So we'll have to find a way around that, obviously, or through it. So very good. Okay, Butterfield, are you there, Butterfield? Is Butterfield there? Yes, there you are. Okay, so Butterfield, yes, a classic question, right? Why does God allow suffering, right? This is actually one of the questions, not so much that is asked by Job, right? But I think it's an important question. What we're going to see in the text, because remember, the prologue is not the true version of God. So if you're seeing God in the prologue orchestrating this, remember, the prologue is not serious. So this is not the true picture of God, right? So if you're deducing from the prologue that God is orchestrating our suffering, and that God is testing us, or God is punishing us, and these are the two theories, by the way, in the text about suffering. God is testing us, this is the prologue. God is punishing us, these are the friends. What we're going to see is that the narrator, the author of the book of Job, is going to go in a different direction. God is neither the punisher, he's neither the one who puts a test, who puts us through a test. It's something else altogether, right? We're going to look at a completely different perspective on suffering, on the causes of suffering, and on the role of God in suffering, right? So be careful, Butterfield, right? From basing, I don't know if you did that, but do not rely on the prologue, right, for your theology. Nobody should be doing that, right? The prologue he is setting up the view of the ancients. And yes, the ancients did believe that God played with our destiny like this, right? But then he moves into a totally different direction, right? Still Butterfield, what did I write? How is God? Oh my God, I can't read myself. Butterfield, what did you write? How is God? Can you complete that sentence?
My other question was just about like the back and forth between Job and his friends, and then the kind of short, just in chapter 38, we were talking about this in our group, God's kind of short reply addressing all of their concerns and kind of contrasting theological opinions. And so I was just a little bit unclear on the structure and what to actually take away from all of the conversations that happened between Job and his friends.
Yes, so definitely, right? We have conversation between Job and his friends. The conversations between Job and his friends is the conversation between where the new person that Job is becoming and the old system of belief of a patriarchal, punitive God, right? So this is, the friends represent the old way. They represent the old perspective of God as punisher, as judge. And Job, you can see, is wrestling with that and moving in a different direction. So make sure you guys write this down, right? This is the purpose of the friends. The friends represent the old order of things. How God was viewed within the ancient world, within patriarchy, as just, as the one who punishes the transgressor, blesses the one who obeys, right? This was really the view. You obey, you are blessed. You disobey, you are cursed. This is also the view in the 5 books of Moses, right? So they represent the old order, and Job, you can sense, is wrestling against that, is moving in a different direction, and the book of Job as a whole is moving in a different direction, which is why I classify it as mother's house, right? So does that help a little bit, Butterfield, with at least why the friends are there? That's what they represent, right? And then God, of course, we'll talk about his response, which is also less than satisfactory, right? Difficult to read, as some of you noticed, right? So Cologne mentioned also the wife. A lot of you had this grudge against this wife, right? Edmonds, yes, that was interesting, Edmonds. Yes, this notion, right? This is the old view, right? The old view which the friends represent is that God is the judge. He knows what he's doing and we should trust him, right? Now, Job is going against that. He's questioning, meaning God could be wrong. And this is where we're headed, right? If we are really in what the Hebrews believe to be a covenantal relationship with God, then nothing is set in stone. You do something, I do something, you respond, I respond, and together we build this, right? So I really want to stop on that because this is so important, and I wish I had emphasized it more in the beginning. Make sure you jot this down, right? The God of the Hebrew Bible, especially the God of the mother's house that we are studying, nothing is set in stone. God makes a move, we make a move, God changes, goes this way, we go that way, God moves here, we move here, we move there, right? I'm struck at how much spirituality in these texts of the mother's house is like a conversation. Let me explain what I mean by that. We are in a conversation type of spirituality. Con means with. Versation from versere, which means to turn. To converse is to turn with. You go there, okay. I go here, okay. Together we are moving and meandering. So we are in a context where God can be destabilized by us, can be shifted by us, can be moved by us. This is something we're not used to, especially if we come from the Greek perspective where God is, permanence, substance, right? The original principle. You cannot move God in the Greek, right? God is just moving you around like a pawns on a chessboard. In the Hebrew context, God moves us, but we can also move God. And we see this, and I want to tell you this story because I should have told you this in the beginning because it sets the tone for the whole text of the mother's house. Let me give you a really interesting story from the Talmud, which highlights this way that God is not set in stone. In the text of the mother's house, God is moving along with his creation. So here's the story. This is from the Talmud. And of course, all of you, before I go into that story, we all should remember what the Talmud is. Remember, the Talmud is simply the conversations of the rabbis around the text. Rabbis, which are the Jewish teachers, right, around the Bible. So in the Talmud, you have commentary on the law, you have commentary on the stories. And this is a story that is told in the Talmud. So these are a bunch of rabbis who decided to do a kind of 1-year Bible reading spree. So they start reading together and they're studying together every day. And they start with the book of Genesis and they're studying, right? And then they get slowly to the story of Noah. When they get to the story of Noah, they actually become really uncomfortable. And they're like, who is this guy? What the hell is this guy doing here? We don't like this guy, right? And they get so pissed at Noah, they almost stop the whole project. They're like, we're not going to read any further. This, right? So one rabbi says, let's continue. Let's make an effort. Let's continue. So they continue and they get a little later to the story of Abraham. And at that moment, they're like, oh man, this guy, yes, he's the man. We love this guy. They take some vodka. They start drinking at the health of Abraham. They do a little dance. They're so happy with this guy. And now they're reconciled with the whole Bible and they move on. And this is actually the story. So here's a question that emerges from that story that I will ask you and see if you can answer. Why do you think that the rabbis hated Noah but loved Abraham? In other words, what did Abraham have that Noah didn't have? What do you think? The way you answer this we will clarify what the mother's house means once and for all. So why do you think God hated Noah? God. Why do you think the rabbis hated Noah but loved Abraham? What does Abraham have or do that Noah doesn't have or doesn't do or doesn't say, perhaps? Right? We have something about what they said or didn't say. Okay, Rudolph, let's give it a try. Go ahead. You're the first victim.
I believe Noah is a very quiet servant of the Lord and does not ask any questions, whereas Abraham is striking a conversation.
Ah, you got it. Right. First try. You got it. Absolutely. Right. Look at this situation. God comes to Noah and he's like, hey, I thought I should tell you, I'm about to destroy the whole world. Noah, okay. Have you seen this? The best illustration. Have you seen Saturday Night Live with that guy, you know, who's being hit on by J-Lo? And he's like, okay, have you seen this? Because this is exactly, y'all need to see this. Edmonds, you saw this? No, you just have a question? Okay, this is a funny, do you watch Saturday Night Live? Okay, this is, I forget his name, but he's dating her now, actually. And there's this funny sketch where she's like declaring her love for him and he's a little retarded. So he's like, you know, okay, like a dummy, right? So kind of like that, Noah, right? God is like told him he's about to destroy the universe and Noah is like, all right, no problem, doesn't even respond, starts building the ark, right? No problem, business as usual. Now we have a different story, unless you have something to add, Edmonds, to the Noah part. Go ahead, then I'll continue.
Well, the thing I was going to add is that I feel like the way that God treats both of them is different too. God instructs Noah, whereas God actually involves Abraham more.
Nice.
And I think that's it's a difference in how God is acting in both of these.
Very good, very good. Yes, we have a kind of hierarchy with Noah. God tells him what to do and Noah just executes, you know, humbly. But when it comes to Abraham, it's a different story. Watch this. Same scenario. God comes to Abraham and says, hey, you're my friend. I thought I should tell you this, but just so you know, I'm about to destroy these two cities over there, Sodom and Gomorrah. I just thought you should know. Now, Abraham kicks into action. Unlike Noah, he's like, whoa, 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 whoa. First of all, his nephew is over there, right? So he's worried about his nephew, Lot, who's living over there. Second of all, he's thinking, whoa, this doesn't sound right. Remember, Abraham knew these guys. He fought for them in a war a few years before this encounter with God, right? So these are his friends, basically, right? So he's like, it's actually interesting that he had friends in Sodom and Gomorrah. It tells you a lot about Abraham, right? So he starts to bargain with God. And he's like, listen, God, I see what you're saying, you know, but, you know, maybe you're a little too, you know, maybe you haven't woken up on the right foot today. Maybe you need some breakfast. I don't know. You're not yourself. Are you sure you want to do this? And then he starts to bargain and says, you know, what if there's 50 righteous people? Would you destroy the city? And God, watch him. He's like, yeah, you have a point. I won't destroy the city if there's 50 people. Now, Abraham, he knows the city very well. He knows there's not 50 righteous people there. So he goes down 40, 30, 20, 10. And at that moment, the rabbis burst into tears because they realize had Abraham bargained up until 0, God might have relented and not destroyed the city at all. But it turns out there was less than 10 people who were righteous. And so the cities were destroyed. But what we're learning here, are you seeing how as Abraham is making his, you know, bargaining, God is shifting. Yes, I agree, I won't destroy. 5 times he says, yes, I will not destroy, or 4 times as he goes down the numbers. This is the God we are talking about in the mother's house. It is the God who is on an equal footing, dialoguing, conversing, turning with, allowing himself to be moved by us, just like we are being moved by him. This is the essence of a true relationship. You don't have a healthy relationship if only one person is going and everyone is following. The healthy relationship is one where they are listening to each other and moving and turning with each other. That's what I mean by mother's house. And so Edmonds, going back to what you said, in the mother's house, no, God is not always right. Right? Because we see this with Abraham. God would have shifted. God agreed with Abraham, you're right. I shouldn't destroy if there's 50 righteous people. Again, you're right. If there's 40, I shouldn't do it. If there's 30, maybe if Abraham had gone down to 0, God would have said, you're right, I shouldn't destroy them. I should love them, right? So we're seeing, this is so powerful. I hope you're sensing and receiving this, that in the Hebrew Bible, or at least in the mother's house, right? We are not in this hierarchy where God is commanding and we are following. We have a say and we can influence. And sometimes I wonder why we don't use our influence when it comes to the end of time scenarios that we are so used to, where we are so used to thinking, the wicked will go to hell and the good will go to heaven. Why is there no Abraham among us disputing this, right? Have you ever wondered why everyone just accepts the scenario of hell and heaven? I think we need more Abrahams to be like, God, this is a terrible idea. Let's do things differently, right? So we need to really become, again, sensitized, like Abraham was sensitized, and not desensitized like Noah was, right? This is the mother's house. Mother's house always thinks of people first, right? And if God is going to destroy people, he's wrong. That's the idea, right? Christo Dulu, go ahead.
Yeah, this has echoes for me in the Quran. I don't remember the story 100%, but the story goes that the Prophet Muhammad, when he ascends to heaven, he negotiates with God, and he brings the number of prayers a day down from 40 to 5. And it's very interesting that like this God that can move exists, not only in the early parts of the Bible that we're discussing now, but it kind of has a through line into later scripture.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, the Quran and the Hebrew Bible are cousin texts, right? So this is why it's good for Jews and Christians to study the Quran and Muslims to study the Bible, because they are really, this is family, right? If you want to understand your uncle, go try and figure out the grandfather, and you will, right? So absolutely. So I love that. So tell me, Muhammad is intercessing for us in heaven. Tell me a little more about this story. I'm intrigued.
Well, I'll have to reread it, but if I remember correctly, he's shown heaven at one point, and he negotiates. I believe Moses is there as well, like kind of part of the negotiation, mediator type.
Excellent. Yes, this is the Middle East, guys. Everybody's negotiating and bargaining, right? The fixed price is never the right price, right? It takes out all the fun. So this is where we are. This is the kind of dialogues we're going to have in these texts, right? Williams, go ahead.
I was going to say the reason why Moses and Abraham would be, those specific characters would be so difficult for people to push against authority. So I feel like because there's specific situations where like rabbis would not necessarily, like Moses is a different type of character because he comes from a different type of lineage. He's royalty. So it's a different type of thing pushing against God because he has a different relationship because he's royalty. But Abraham is just a regular guy. So he can kind of negotiate because he understands that like without this leverage, it's difficult. Like in my essay, I think I mentioned that the questions that I mentioned was like, the problem is that you can't really tell God's intention. It's a conversation, but you don't really know what the conversation is for. Is it for God's benefit or humanity's benefit? And it waffles back and forth during all of the stories that we have. And I think I mentioned that.
Yeah, very good. Yes, of course, when we're in dialogue, we do not understand everything about the person we're talking to, and neither do they sometimes catch on to everything, right, that we're struggling with, right? So there's always a mystery, which is why there needs to be a dialogue, right? Okay, last comment, Rudolph, and then I'll finish my comments.
So rather than struggling with the conversation, I mentioned in my conversation with Ms. Oliveira earlier that it seems to me that it doesn't matter what questions you ask God, you get just an answer, it may not necessarily be the answer to your question that you're asking at that point, nor will God take responsibility for anything going wrong that you deem wrong in your own mind. All you get is something, a divine speech of God that you need to figure out and put into context yourself. Nobody does the work for you.
Yes, there is no spoon feeding in the Hebrew Bible. You really have to do the searching and the exegesis, right, to really get to the truth. Okay, let me go.
Like your class.
Sorry? Yes, like the class, yes. I'm teaching you. Very good. Let me quickly continue the list and then we'll get into the text because it's already almost an hour. Let's see. I'll just go over quickly. See, I'm skipping a few people if you don't mind. Yes, a number of you were uncomfortable with God's response, right? He doesn't seem to answer the question, which was pretty clear, right? Why are you doing this to me? I don't see a clear answer, right? So we'll have to learn to read between the lines if we're going to understand the text. Remember, this is wisdom literature. This is Mother's House. Not everything is subtle. Nothing is obvious, right? We have to dig. Yes, and Christodoulou, you mentioned very rightly that the God's answer seems like might makes right, right? This is a quote, might makes right, meaning God is kind of being coercive, bully. He's bullying Job, right, in this situation. And that, yes, that's a correct assessment, Christodoulou. Very good. Oh, great thing you said, Christodoulou. I think you're right. This text is challenging, and we're going to see that, the transactional view of spirituality that we had in the ancient Near East. In the ancient Near East, you offer a sacrifice and you get what you wanted, right? That was the view. God is like a big cosmic vending machine. If you offer the right sacrifice, he will grant you what you're asking. Transaction, right? This text is dismembering this perspective, right? It's destroying this perspective, and we'll see why. Right, it's a very good assessment. Let's see. Now I can't read my writing anymore. So I'm skipping the rest of you that I didn't read, mostly because I can't read what I wrote, and also for the benefit of time. Okay, are we ready to enter this crazy text? Everybody with me? Okay, great. All right, let's go. Let me put myself on speaker view again. All right, so in the first half, which I'm going to stay another about 45 minutes, I think, or half hour to 45 minutes, I want to talk about the prologue and also the dialogues. And then at the second hour, we will talk about God's response and the epilogue. That's the program, right? So, okay. So remember what I told you about the prologue, right? Prologue and epilogue, written in prose. The author, and the rest in poetry. The author is saying, this is not where you're going to get the important ideas that I'm trying to teach you. We need to read them with a grain of salt, especially since the prologue is actually really setting up the ancient Near Eastern view of spirituality and moving beyond it. In the dialogues, we start to move beyond it. So make sure you write this down, that the prologue is really just the author setting up the traditional view of God of his time and traditional view of religion. And the intention of the text is to move away from this view. So we have typical, right? We have, first of all, exactly what Christodoulou said, transactional perspective. I mean, read this and tell me if we're not in a transaction. Job chapter 1. So let me find it. Right? I'm reading Job chapter 1. There was a man in the land of Uz named Job. That man was blameless and upright. More on that later. He feared God and shunned evil, right? And so at that point, we're expecting, okay, he feared God, he shunned evil, and then we want to know how, more details, how he is virtuous. But instead, what do we get? We get he had 7 sons, 3 daughters. His possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen. Are you seeing how the author is making a direct connection between Job's virtue and goodness and his wealth? Is everybody seeing how the author is juxtaposing the two? What's the author trying to tell us by writing in this way? Job was very virtuous. And here is the list of his possessions. What's the author saying? What is the subliminal message? Olivera, go ahead.
That the virtues of Job and his material possessions are related, are connected to
Exactly. This is the transaction. Job was good, and therefore, of course, he was blessed, right? Transactional view of the ancient Near East of God, right? If you're good, then here's the list of all the things that will come to you, right? So the author here is poking fun. He's being ironic. He's making fun of this view. He's saying, yes, Job was upright, and behold all his possessions, right? Kind of making fun, being a little satirical about this, right? So we are here, right? Job in the beginning is clearly in a transaction. If I am good, you will bless me, and therefore here are my blessings, and so forth. And this is why Job, I wanted to talk a little bit about those two, but I won't. Let me just continue, right? So we have that view. Then we have the view of God, which is typical Near Eastern view of God. This is also the Greek view, right? God is somewhere up in the heavens playing with us. Chessboard narrative, right? Put him here and see what happens when I put those two here, and then maybe I'll create a war over here. And then, right? This was the view that God was playing with our destinies and enjoying himself, right? And that God was sending us these trials or these sufferings and see what happens, like a chemist, right? Trying to mix substances and see what kind of explosions would happen, right? So this is also an ancient view that God is kind of playing with our destinies, right? Of course, all of this we are going to move away. And of course, we have Satan, which is also very ancient Near Eastern view that there is a dark force, which is almost on equal footing with God. Satan will die out of the narrative. That we're not going to find him again. Okay, so everybody clear on the prologue on what is happening there and why the author writes it in the way he does, right? He's simply highlighting the transactional view and wanting to move beyond it. By the way, the two words that define Job in Job 1, blameless and upright, let's do a little Hebrew. You have tam and you have yashar. Tam simply means kind of naive, actually. Kind of a good guy type. Nice guy, not good guy. Kind of nice guy type person, right? He's a nice guy. Okay, yashar, from the root straight. It means straight, right? Walking the line, basically type of person. Okay, so you have already, just from these two words, you have already a very nice portrait of Job, right? Job is a good person, but in a naive, sheltered sort of way, right? Just like if your life was good, if you had good parents, if you had money, yeah, you'd be a nice person, right? That's the kind of Job, that's the kind of person we're talking about. Someone who is good because he had it good, right? Let me put it this way, right? So Job is someone that is good because he's had it good, right? So this is a typical kind of nice guy who had a, nice parents, nice neighborhood, nice schools. And so of course he turns out nice too, right? So this is not, so what's missing? What's missing in this first, what are you sensing is missing in Job if he's just a nice guy? What do you feel he's missing here? Yes, Williams, you want to talk it out?
Conflict. If you're that nice, there's no conflict. So no suffering.
Exactly.
It's like, if you wanted to, you could even take the fact that, like, basically he's in a position of a Buddha, and basically because he's had no experience of suffering, he's unable to see the world in an absolute way. Like, he can only see the world as nice.
Excellent.
And because they've shielded him from that, he has no concept of reality.
That's it, exactly, right? He hasn't really entered life. And so he's like out on the beach, hasn't entered the ocean, right? So of course he's going to be nice. So the text itself is criticizing Job when calling him tam. They're saying, you're nice, but you're naive kind of nice. You're nice because you've never been through anything. Let's see what happens if you go through something, if you're still that nice, right? And we see that Job loses the niceness in a few chapters, right? Let's see. Who else wants to comment? And we have Rudolph and Edmonds. Go ahead.
I just made a quick note saying that he doesn't seem to have a genuine interest in embracing the intellectual and ethical good. He's only focused on some sort of earthly existence that's very comfortable. However, the hard work that is connected to self-criticism, self-reflection is what really leads to growth. And that stretch is just not there yet.
Yeah, he's pretty secure, right? He knows what to do, how to play the game. His kids go to a party. He knows exactly what sacrifices to make so they won't get killed by God by doing crazy stuff at parties, like, you know, that happens, right? So yeah, this is someone who's pretty complacent, pretty sure of himself, right? And maybe this is part of the problem, right? Very good. Edmonds, go ahead, add to this.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add, but I do take issue with this sort of he's completely naive and, you know, he's just doing this for show mostly idea, because, you know, he loses everything he has, he loses his kids, and he's still, you know, trying to be, you know, this devout guy that says God giveth and God taketh away, right? You know, it's only after all of that and when he's suddenly given these painful sores that he, you know, starts questioning why he's been so good for the longest time. You know, and I don't think that necessarily makes him, you know, just only good on the surface, right? I think that you can be he could be a very good person, and I don't think it's necessarily wrong to question your belief if you're, you know, everything that you've always assumed to be true and is suddenly called into question, right?
Yes, but be careful. The tam is only at the beginning. As he begins to question his beliefs, he's not tam anymore, right? So the text, remember, we're moving away from the prologue. So tam is just here. When he begins to question, he changes into a genuinely authentic, right, believer. We're going to see that. But here at the beginning, not yet. Do you see that, Edmonds?
No, I do see it, yes. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So yes, he changes. He's going to move away from being just tam. He's going to be more. Maimonides, actually, the great medieval Jewish sage, let me write his name here, says the following about Job. He says, well, Job, yes, he was tam, but later he became wise, right? So he was naive in the beginning, and at the end of the story, finally, he becomes wise, which is different. Wisdom comes from experience, from having really entered life. Tam, you haven't yet entered life, and so you're still kind of, you know, rosy-cheeked about the whole situation, right? Now, yashar, it means walking the line is literally straight. So Job here clearly very much doing the right thing, walking the line, submitting to the cosmic law, right? This is a kind of more patriarchal, rule-based, right, approach. So Job in the beginning is clearly still in the Father's house, in the sense of he is keeping the ethical rules, he's doing the right things, the right rituals, he's giving to the poor, he's walking the line, right? And yet still he becomes the target of this, right, craziness. So that's just to give you a portrait, right? So of course we're going to move away from this portrait in the next few seconds. So a couple more comments. Williams, do you still have a comment, or is that from before?
No, I was gonna say, if anybody knows anything about genetic DNA testing, there was a scientist who figured out that altruism as a trait in humanity is not something that's real. It's something that's so small it's not quantifiable by science. And he basically went through this crisis of faith. He was a devout atheist, and he basically spent the rest of his life trying to prove that altruism was part of human society, because you couldn't prove it. And basically he spent the rest of his life taking care of beggars. Yeah, he died a pauper, and he won a Nobel. He was so smart that basically when he wrote the paper about it, he didn't have any citations. And basically, it's like, think about that, like, because he basically was really upset that, like, he was like, how could God make a universe where, like, there's no altruism that naturally occurs?
Yeah, and in a way he's right. Altruism is not natural, right? You have to go through something to develop that, right? As we're going to see with Job, actually. So I'm glad you brought that up, because this is exactly Job. There's no altruism in Job. He's focused on his family, right? In the prologue. Later, there will be a shift, and we'll see therefore how maybe altruism is developed character trait rather than an innate character trait, right? Acquired rather than innate. Rudolph, conclude this short discussion for us.
I just wanted to ask Steve, is what you just said pointing at God? Are you connecting altruism as also a certain level of altruism from God's side, or are you only pointing it as at the human being?
So
In
the way
your
he
last
described,
sentence, you said there is no altruism in the world given. And I heard you say by God, even though you may not have verbalized it. But is it altruism that we are to expect, or is altruism something that we are to develop?
so the way that it works is that because altruism is a gene that is repeated over and over again, and because we can't tell if the gene is on or off, he basically came up with the view that like altruism is not something that exists naturally. We have no idea if it exists or if it influences the world. So he took on a very selfless view, and he tried to prove that altruism existed, and it wasn't just a gene that was there. So he spent the rest of his life giving his money, his home to paupers, because he just couldn't live in the world. It was a realization that basically shattered his faith in reality. So he had to disprove it. He spent his entire life doing it.
Okay.
I'll put it in the chat if you guys want to watch it.
Send us. Okay, Edmonds, last comment of everybody. Then I have to go on to the dialogues. Go ahead, Edmonds.
Oh, wow, that's a lot of pressure. No, I was actually just going to remark on that same thing that Williams was talking about. I don't know, there's this famous atheist, Richard Dawkins, who actually wrote a book called The Selfish Gene, which is exactly this. I think it's continued on that work, but I think it's interesting. You know, he's saying that if you look at the genetics, you know, altruism is actually like a genetically favorable trait, that it's not some sort of thing bestowed by God. And so I guess, you know, I think it's sort of interesting to think about it that way, as, you know, is it genetically favorable because God bestowed that on us, or is it genetically favorable just because that's the nature of evolution?
Great. And what I find interesting is that if it's a gene that can be shut on and off, right, then we're seeing here, we will see with Job how the gene was shut off originally and turned on through the experience of suffering, actually. So a lot of philosophers have talked about the connection between suffering and compassion, right? If you haven't suffered, and I think we talked about this before, if you haven't suffered, you cannot develop true compassion. You cannot suffer with, which is the meaning of compassion, right? Just in case you didn't know, right? Com means with, passion is suffer, right? So you cannot suffer with if you've never suffered. So you cannot sense, you cannot be sensitive to the plight of others if you haven't gone through it. And we will see how Job will be cut open by the suffering he goes through, right? Which brings us to the dialogue. So let's go there. What we're noticing, and what a lot of you noticed in your reading assignments, is that Job begins to change. And this is why he enters into conflict with his friends, because the friends, like I told you, represent the old order, and Job is moving towards something new, right? Notice at the beginning, Job says the right thing. He says, you know, God has given, God has taken away. There he is, still the old order, submitting, God knows, I'm just going to shut up, right? And then he loses his health. And that's the last straw. And at that moment, Job explodes, right? Job loses it. Basically, he loses it. All the political correctness is out the window. All the sanctimoniousness is out the window. Job is just now raw human emotion, right? And so he's going through a metamorphosis. He's mutating in front of our eyes. And I want us together to figure out what are three main ways that he changes. Throughout the dialogues, you see him. His personality is changing. His attitude is changing. And I have highlighted three main ways that he is different from the Job of the prologue. So I want to hear you on this. What do you think are three main ways, or at least one, that you find he is different in the dialogues from the prologue, and he's shifting, he's changing into a different man? So let me hear you on that. Let's see if our perspectives overlap. So what's the first thing you notice that is different about Job in the dialogues as he is, you know, yelling at his friends and the Job in the prologue, right? What's the first thing that you would think you would see as a difference in his behavior, in his words, in his attitude. I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to wait till you speak. Rudolph, go ahead.
Well, in the beginning, he's still complaining and talking about himself a lot, versus in the end, he is listening. When you learn
you're going too far. You're going too far. You're going in the epilogue. Just between the prologue and the dialogues when he's yelling at his friends. Because listening, that's way in the epilogue, right, Rudolph?
Okay, I accept that.
Okay.
But even when talking with his friends, he displays more humility and interest versus only combativeness.
Wait. Where do you see humility and interest in the way that Joe is?
There's an exchange. There's a conversation between him and you. Look, you must have done this and that wrong. Here is what happens to you when you do this wrong. Yeah, but. Yes,
he's resisting the whole way. Even his friends tell him, stop talking like a wind, right?
There is, as you go through the prologue, there is a developing insight in the person who slowly recognizes that regardless of what his arguments are, they're not leading to any kind of result.
Okay, I'll give you that.
That's going into the main course.
Yes, I'll make that our first point. So number one, in the prologue, right, Job is pretty, I guess, sure of himself, right? He knows the way. He knows how things are done, right? When we get to the dialogues, we have a Job who is notably confused, right? Doesn't know the rules of the game anymore, right? Does that fit a little bit with what you were saying, Rudolph? He's confused. He's asking questions, right?
Yeah, he's confused. I don't think you can even apply any kind of rules of engagement, because he's just mesmerized by his own arrogance, his belief in him being right, his conviction that he's such a great guy that there is no reason that he ever deserves any like this, just blinds him from being open.
Okay, very good, right? So he's like, wait a second, if I'm such a good guy, why is this happening to me? Right? So all of a sudden, he thought he knew how the world works, and now all of a sudden, all the rules have changed. God is cheating. It's like God is cheating at poker. Change the rules of the game, and now Job is like, wait a second, I played by the rules, and I'm not getting my reward. What is going on? So the first thing I'm seeing, in the middle of his arrogance, right, there is a confusion. He doesn't know what's happening. He doesn't understand why the rules changed, why this is happening. It's not fair. And his whole... And he is just, his friends are giving him answers and he's pushing back with more questions, right? So that's the first notable difference, right? From the prologue, where he seems to know the rules of the game. He's pretty self-assured. Now he is confused, in the dark, angry, right? That's the first thing we're seeing. Very good. Second, anything else you're seeing that's different from the Job of the prologue? You can look at the tone of his voice. You can look at his attitude. You can look at the content of what he's saying. How is he different? Let's see if anyone else comes up with a second point on where he differs. Which Job is louder? The Job of the prologue or the Job of the dialogues?
The Job of the dialogue is louder because of the fact that he's now confronted with a situation he's never been confronted for. Okay. It's a crisis.
And so what does this make him louder like this? What does this reveal about what's happening to Job, the fact that he's louder? Giannakopoulos, you want to try to answer that?
Yeah, I'm sorry my camera's off, but he's louder. My camera's off because I'm in the car and my phone's gonna die soon. But anyway, he's more genuine after having gone through tribulations. Whereas before he was robotic, going through the motions, and then once he becomes more genuine and he's actually wondering and asking and trying, kind of being more of a human, he becomes louder.
Excellent, right? This is the second point. From robotic, going through the motions, blindly obeying, he becomes passionate, emotional. All of a sudden, he comes alive. It's as though before he was like kind of, you know, like a two-dimensional. All of a sudden, something erupts that we didn't even know was there. You couldn't guess that he was so full of anger and bitterness from the prologue. Something really explodes, and now he's exploding in a way that is almost blasphemous, right? He's crossing every line. We were complaining about the Tower of Babel, right? Crossing the line. Job has gone way beyond, right? He wants to be in the throne room so he can make his case, right? This is how emotional Job has become, right? Very good. A couple quotes. Let me just give you a couple quotes for these 2 points, and then we'll go to the third one so you have quotes. For the first point, go to chapter 3, verse 3. This is for the confusion, right? And you have here, cursed be the day I was born, chapter 3, verse 3. Right? This is a man who doesn't know anymore why he is on the earth and wants to go back, right? This is the ultimate confusion, right? I don't even know who I am anymore and why I'm here and what is happening, right? Another quote also, chapter 3, verse 23, you have to the man who has lost his way, right? Whom God has hedged about, right? He's seeing himself as having lost his way or as having been trapped by God, right? This is really somebody speaking from a place of really darkness and confusion, right? And then for the second one, robotic to passionate, we have chapter 4, verse 2. This is Eliphaz telling Job, if one ventures a word with you, will it be too much, right? Right, basically he's saying, can I put in a word here? Or are you just gonna keep talking, right? That's basically what he's saying. You need to really get into the attitude of these guys, right? Continuing on chapter 7, verse 11, still in the moment of emotionality, you have Job saying, on my part, I will not speak with restraint, right? I will give voice to the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. Everything is out. He's just laying it all out, right? He's letting it all hang out, right? So there's no restraint, no politically correctedness, nothing, right? The last one, the obvious one, and I'm going to say that one myself to spare you, is from submissive, right? He becomes rebellious, blasphemous, right? On the verge, to the point where his wife is like, just curse him, let's get it over with. You're there already, right? So this is really, right, in the sense of rebellious, in the sense that some of you noticed, I think Edmonds, right, was noticing this. He is questioning God's judgment. God, I disagree with this judgment. Come down here. Let's talk about this, right? So this is, he's refusing what is happening to him. He's questioning the judgments of the master of the universe, right? So this is really the height of rebellion. He's not anymore acknowledging that God is God, that God knows everything, that God is all just, all powerful, all knowing. He's saying, no, you don't know, you're not just, and I refuse to accept this. Destabilizing the concept, the Godhead. He's destabilizing the Godhead, right, with his complaining. And then the quotes for that, of course, you have oh, that's the one I just read, right? I will not speak with restraint. So chapter 7, verse 12 or 11. Chapter 7, verse 11. I will not speak with restraint. Good. So that's where we are, right? We are now in a situation where Job has morphed into this kind of monster, right? He is confused, he is in the dark, he is emotional, he is angry, he is bitter, and he is questioning the judgment of the Lord of the universe. This is not the Job we know. And everyone is freaking out around him, including his wife, right? Now, before I get any more comments, let me ask you this question. From the end of the story, between Job and his friends, whom does God seem to favor? Of whom does God say, yeah, this guy spoke the truth? Remember? Who, according to God, spoke the truth? Christo Dulu.
Oh, I had a separate question.
Okay, hold your question. I'll be right with you. Let me just finish this point. So, who can answer my question? Who else? Still need to. Rudolph, did you, Giannakopoulos, go ahead.
Hello?
Yes.
Hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I believe that God favored Job over his friends.
Yes. At the end of the story, it's shocking. God turns to Job and God turns to the friends and says to them, you have not spoken in the right way about me like my friend Job. In other words, everything that Job has been saying, which is incredible, it's insecure, it's confused, it's emotional, it's not politically correct, it's blasphemous, and God turns around and says, yeah, that's my man. He spoke the right thing about me. He knows me. He gets it. And you guys who were defending me, I don't like what she said. You were wrong. Now this is interesting, right? So what does this tell you about the God that is being described in the book of Job? What kind of God do we have here who loves Job and dislikes his friends? In other words, what does this tell you about what God loves? In fact, let's look at it. Let's look at Job's confusion, his emotionality, his rebelliousness, and let's talk about why would God actually enjoy and like those things. So let's start. Sorry, I'm gonna finish my point and then I'll get your questions. So write them down, whoever still has questions. Let's look at the first one, the confusion. What is it in Job's confusion that God appreciates? Tell me, what do you think there is in our confusion? Sometimes when we're in the dark, we don't know the way, we're not sure which way to turn. What is it that God appreciates about that? So let me get Giannakopoulos and then Williams. Go ahead.
It's the willingness to actually ask questions so that we can further our knowledge instead of simply being, still and saying, oh, whatever happens, happens, It's actually asking those questions, even if they may seem really bad. You ask them because you want answers.
Excellent.
You're not complacent.
Very good. And
that's what he loves.
I'm going to align myself with Williams, right? Confusion is the prerequisite of growth. If you don't go through phases of confusion where you don't know where you are, you don't know what hit you, you're not growing, right? So if everything's always clear and everything is always transparent and everything always makes sense, you're stuck, right? So what God loves in our confusion as human beings is that the confusion is a sign that we're leaving the old paradigm and we're moving towards a new paradigm. We're growing, we're evolving. Williams, do you want to add to, I just repeated what you said, but do you want to add to what I said?
Oh, I was just going to say it's because of the fact that so if you take each specific story as a point in the process of evolution, the Bible, the first chapters of Genesis are about man's evolution out of the garden, him gaining some type of self-awareness and him gaining his own agency. Yes. The second part about Job is, what do you do with that agency? You could be submissive as societies before where you had kings, other things, or you can go into a period where you go through self-discovery, like you ask all these questions. Even though you still have a relationship with God or your creator, you still can have a contentious relationship like Job had in the second sections, where it's not necessarily you're praising God for whatever reason. You're still angry because God did things you didn't want.
Excellent, right? This is like the Garden of Eden. Job has been expulsed from his complacency by his suffering. And in a way, this is an opportunity for Job to grow and develop and move to become a higher version of himself, right? So excellent. Now, what about emotional? What does God enjoy about our emotionality, about the way that we erupt, the way that we cannot manage our anger sometimes, the way that we burst into tears in the wrong times, the way that we throw that thing against the ceiling or the wall, right? I mean, in our culture, any type of outburst is seen as, you're a lunatic, right? But we're in the Middle East, thank God. So this is explosion of emotion. What does God love when you throw a tantrum? What does he love about how sometimes you put your fist in the wall and you break the wall? or you burst into tears. What is so beautiful about these outbursts that God would be like, yeah, that's my man right there? Rudolph, go ahead.
In my view, these are cleansing moments where you hold that mirror up in front of you, and the natural response of your mind is to just scream. And that's usually when we lose it.
Yes, God is enamored with us when we lose it, right? Because at that moment, we are most profoundly authentic, right? We're not trying to, pull it down. We're not trying to, paste a smile on our faces. We're being authentic. And at that moment, even if we are really crossing all the lines and we are yelling in the face of God and cursing God, there's something beautiful and precious about that outburst in the eyes of the Creator, right? So next time you throw a tantrum, I threw one this morning actually at customer service at Verizon. I thought I was gonna kill somebody. And well, God is telling me right now, it's okay, girl. You're lovable then too, right? Talking to robots for an hour is just not cutting it for me. So, right, we should never be ashamed. What we're learning from this story is we should never be ashamed at our outbursts, even if they are rage or anxiety, panic attacks, anger, frustration, depression, anxiety. All of these are part of what makes us beautifully human, right? And they're moments of truth. Each one of these outbursts are a moment of truth, which God treasures, right? Receives with, infinite delicateness, right? Very good. Rudolph, did you want to add to that, or is that old hand?
Yeah, no, it's not old. I just, you're right. Those are authentic moments, and they are beautiful for ourselves. I want to throw in a word of caution, though, because in our modern world, in that social contract that we have, in my case with corporate America, in the work world, or even in colleges as students, if we lose it and show great natural emotion, it is not looked upon with admiration and understanding. It actually makes us the ogre very often. It's interesting how that changes, because in the eyes of an ethical God, this is the thing that we need to do in order to grow and be ourselves.
Exactly.
In the eyes of our peers, we're nothing but a screaming idiot.
Exactly. This is why I want to point it out, because we are taught to bottle up our emotions, right? And to fake it and to act nice like Job, right? What we're learning is that there is a space that is given to us here in this text. There is a space for these moments. If we cannot do these moments, if we can never get angry or never weep, right, we will never go deep enough in life, right? And God, in a way, is encouraging, at least this text is encouraging us, don't be afraid to tap into this part of yourself and to allow it to erupt. If you want to be somebody spiritually, right, you have to be able to tap into yourself in that way. And yes, corporate America, academia, they shun this, of course, because we live in a society of, J.D. Salinger said, right, in his book, The Catcher in the Rye, we live in a society of fakes. So that's where we are. Excellent. Okay, last one. This one is crazy. God loves it when we rebel against him, when we question his motives, when we get angry at him. What is going on? Why is it that God loves that? What is so beautiful about our rebellions and the way that we cuss him out sometimes? I mean, imagine God is like, oh, you cuss me out, music to my ears. Williams, tell us.
Means is a path forward. Like without you being frustrated with family members, other people, it means you're growing as a person. God is accepting of our anger because it means that, like, maybe he did do something wrong, because it's a dialogue, and because it's a dialogue, not commands. He's not the king. We're in a situation where he could say, maybe I made the wrong decision by killing your son, but like, I'll explain it to you. No, like, because in some texts there are situations where he'll talk to you and say, like, maybe I made the wrong decision. But I think that God likes it in this context because of the fact that it's about growth. Like everybody said before, but it's not just about growth. It's really about the fact that, like, he can see that we have our own agency, and that it's not his agency. Because if it was his agency, we would just be like, God said this, so like I'm gonna be happy with him burning my village to the ground. Yeah. But agency is, I think, really, it's growth and agency. I think that's what its goal is.
Excellent, right. And it's also being real, right? God prefers us to be real with him than to be fake. Real and angry, then fake and nice. I think God is like, oh, give me real and angry anytime. Right. I'm tired of this fake and nice people, right, following me around. Let me have one good angry person with whom I can finally have a real dialogue, right? The God that has only fans, fan club, it's not interesting for God to have a fan club of worshipers, right? God wants interaction. He wants communication, conversation. You can't have a conversation with a fan club, right? And so we need to stop being fans and become interlocutors, right? Who can actually have the spine to stand up and say what we think, right? So absolutely, God seems to enjoy, in other words, God seems to enjoy a good challenge, a good conversation, even if they're cussing you out, even if the person is cussing him out. He's like, oh, somebody's talking to me, right? Let me go to this person. Let's have this. Let's do this, right? So instead of just holding it down and acting nice and keeping it all low, right? God prefers an eruption, which is the beginning of a dialogue, than fake niceness, right? So that's what we're learning. Go ahead. Haven't heard you in a while. Go ahead.
I think that's a reoccurring theme. This idea that God like looks at the intent and like that like God prefers the intentions of the heart rather than like these like sacrifices and superficial like offerings and rituals. And Job is kind of like a good example of that. Like this idea of his faith, like on like the prologue, it just looks so outstanding and nice, but then like take away everything and he's left with like this reality that it's his faith isn't as good as he thought it was. And then once he kind of has that dialogue with God, that's what God really appreciates and like kind of understands, and that's how he grows.
You got it. Very good. Okay, so I need to conclude this first section because we're running out of time. So let me just say a few words of conclusion, and then we'll take up after the break with the speech, with God's response. But in conclusion, right, what we are seeing in the evolution of Job is what Giannakopoulos said earlier. Job becomes human, right? He becomes confused, emotional, rebellious. He becomes human. He goes through the suffering and lets the suffering grind him to dust. And at that moment, he is most beautiful in the eyes of the Creator. You can imagine why, because the Creator is creative, and when he sees dust, he gets excited, right? So I'm not even kidding. Like, this is really one of the main ideas of the book of Job, is that the becoming dust, allowing ourselves to be crushed by life, and to get to a point of complete confusion and, being cut off from everything we knew, is the opportunity for the Creator to rebuild us. And I think I'm anticipating on one of the main theological points of the book of Job. But for sure, we are seeing that it is in as much as we enter our humanity that we truly meet God. Let me say that again, because this is the most important point. It is in as much that we enter our humanity that we truly encounter God. As long as you're trying to be more than human, you're never going to meet God. As long as you're trying to cover it up and, put on makeup and, fake it and put on this persona and this mask and this fake self, you can't meet your Creator. It's the moment you enter life and connect deeply with your own humanity, with your own shadow, that you can begin the journey, genuine journey with God. So it's so powerful that, unlike the Greek, not to just backstab them as we're going to do in the whole class, right? Unlike the Greek view that God is found by separating from our materiality, separating from our humanity, we have to rise above our bodies to connect to God. In the Greek culture, here we re-enter our bodies. And it is in as much as I'm connected to my body, to my suffering, to my existence, that I'm going to really connect to the Creator. God is accessible through our humanity, not outside of it, right? Okay, now we need to take a break. Hold your questions. We can do a little more later, but we do need to take a break. So 5 minutes, 4:55. we will go into the response of God. And I want you to think about it for those 5 minutes. I'm going to do a poll. I'm going to ask you how many of you are satisfied with the answer and how many of you are not. And then we'll take it from there. Okay, so I'll see you guys in a bit. I'm going to stop the recording.